Hello, good afternoon. We're coming to you on Sunday, the 26th of September. My name's Cam, and I'm joined by resident F1 expert and opinion haver, Matthew Kersey. How's it going, Matt?
Good, yeah. No, it's good to be here. I have got many opinions on what we saw over this weekend.
Well, I don't have any opinions, so I'm relying on you to carry us through. We just watched the Russian Grand Prix, Sochi, which I was reliably informed earlier in the week was the worst track on the calendar and never produces an interesting race. And of course, that's exactly what happened this week. So let's just get into it, really.
I don't know about that. We've got a lot of records that Sochi still hasn't broken here. Not to tip our cap too heavily, but we've only ever had a Mercedes winner at Sochi.
I think that was more by luck than judgment today. Well, actually, it was probably more by judgment than luck, but it certainly wasn't nailed on to be that way. You sent me an image earlier in the week, which I'm going to put up on screen now, of a rain-soaked track, or underwater, I would describe it, and certainly that's what we were all expecting this week.
Definitely. So, the reports were coming in when the F1 circus rolled back into Sochi that there was torrential rain. They were seeing more rain than they normally do across the entire month over the space of a couple of days. And some fantastic photos and videos that got out on Thursday of, pickup trucks trying to make their way down some of the escape roads by the start-finish straight underwater. Why is his name escaped me right at this moment? But there was a great video from one of the F3 drivers doing handstands in the F3 paddock while he was pretty much covered up to his elbows in water. And it sounds like the support races really had a tough time with their paddock and the amount of water that was there. But it was looking like, okay, I may have said Sochi didn't change the script too much in terms of an overall winner, but our first wet race seemed to be on in Russia.
Well, actually, just funny you mentioned seeing the handstands. I did see Mercedes Twitter posting, I think on Friday, Lewis Hamilton doing the dance from I'm Singing in the Rain, where he's skipping along under his umbrella. The rain certainly came for free practice 3, which obviously got cancelled. We did have quali though, which we weren't expecting on Saturday. We thought it was going to be Sunday quali. Quali ended up looking like this. Of course, we had Verstappen not running at all, as far as I can remember. I was quite ill during this period, so I don't really remember qualifying. But if you could
why
run us
didn't
through
Max? Why didn't Max run? I think that's
the power unit issue would be the main thing, really. And obviously him, we knew before the race Leclerc was taking it, and my memory's escaping me now, but I feel like somebody else was taking the power unit as well, but which obviously was the 4th of the year, which led to a penalty. We found out just before the race as well that Valtteri was going to be taking it, so he was obviously in P17 or 16 from the start, so this wasn't actually where he qualified, because obviously he qualified 7th. Talk us through qualifying. We obviously had Lando Norris on top, George Russell with another good qualifying performance, and Lewis Hamilton kind of messing up quite badly at a certain point.
So I guess if you haven't watched qualifying, first off, stop this video right now, go and watch. Probably you only need to catch the last 5 minutes of Q3. Being honest, it was relatively straightforward up until that point, wasn't it? It was your usual drivers in the drop zone. You did have Max completing, only a single lap, or even might have just been an install lap that he ended up doing with his fresh power unit, which we were expecting Sochi to be the place where he would take that, considering the 3-pace grid penalty he had from the Monza incident, which, when we recorded our Italian GP race review, we weren't sure then, but, he did get a 3-place drop for that. So, Charles did end up getting through to Q2, but no point in running at that point. He knew he'd be starting 19th at best. Yeah, it stayed dry. It stayed sort of relatively wet, excuse me, through the first two sessions of qualifying, and then just reached that crossover point of moving on to the dry tires in the last 5 minutes of Q3. And, it became a theme across the entire weekend. You need to be on the right tires at the right time. Guys like George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris all made that right choice. Lewis Hamilton coming in to change his tires. He ended up skidding, as you say, into that very tight pit lane that they've got there at the Sochi Autodrome, and breaking his front wing in half. Chaos in the Mercedes pit box as time is ticking down the whole time because, they didn't have the front wing ready. They needed to push him forward so they could get Valtteri through so he could actually end up setting a lap, massively compromising his own grid position. He qualified 7th, as you say, and then ended up taking that new part to drop down to 17th. But man, what a fantastic qualifying session. It's really funny saying, it produced a mixed up grid when you look at it and go, okay, P1 is a McLaren, P2 is a Ferrari, P3 is a Williams. You don't have to maybe necessarily go back that long, or when you started watching the sport as well. That's
a 1990s grid. That was
2000s
from my childhood.
Yeah,
that was,
for sure.
Michael and Ralph on the podium, and David Coulthard in between, or something like that. That would have been that. I just want to talk about Hamilton's pit lane crash quickly, because obviously it was the pivotal moment in qualifying. Does he have time to sit on pole to get that other lap in once the tyres are warm? Obviously you only had time to go around once, you can't get the warmth in the tyres. Does he have that time if he doesn't make that mistake? How crucial was it? Or were they too late anyway with getting the tyres?
So you're right to point that out, and I think that ended up being the most important part of it. It wasn't good enough to just be on the slick tires for one lap. All the drivers really needed a minimum of 2 laps, and the guys who got 2 laps in, George Russell was the first one onto slicks. He benefited massively from that. Just to get that heat cycle through the tires, it was very cold as you're starting to get into that slightly damp Russian evening. So if a tire is not hot, it's not gripping to the surface, which would have been, quite slick anyway. Think about it. What kind of lap times were we talking about this weekend? It was, 140-ish. I'm not sure off the top of my head what Lando's pole time was, but a minute 40, he definitely spent an extra minute 40 in the pit lane there, Valtteri probably did as well, maybe more like 40 seconds, something like that. It would have been tight. Mercedes definitely left it late. These things come down to track position sometimes, and they were further back, hoping to be the last one over the line if it did stay in Inter's conditions. So it didn't work out too badly for Lewis, I think, when you compare it to what could have been, because he did set a very good time on the Inter tire. It wasn't like, the soft tires were churning out times that were 5-10 seconds quicker. So, his banker lap was enough to give him 5th on the grid, and, that did end up making a difference come race day.
So we end up with a situation with Lando Norris on pole, and as everyone now knows, his weekend went swimmingly and perfect, and we can end the conversation there. I wish, obviously, we'll get onto that. I just want to throw up his Twitter pre-race, because I thought it was a really nice thing he posted about his first pole position and him in a little go-kart spinning around doing donuts. I just thought that was a really cool thing to post, the realization of a dream as such. Moving on to the race results. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, just very quickly. I think it's just worth pointing out, this was the first time since 2012 that we had no Mercedes or Red Bull in the top 3 of the qualifying order. And, that right there shows you, we were talking about, okay, a mixed up grid with these old, with the old names from the sport who are on top there, and it's like, okay, we would have expected this earlier. Just how long a period of dominance Red Bull and Mercedes, who are relative newcomers in the sport, have had.
Well, yeah, I mean, 8 world championships for Mercedes in that time, so it's not really that surprising. I think Ferrari, McLaren, anyone who've been anywhere near, even when they were the closest challenger. So, yeah, let's move on to the race, because obviously we could spend a lot of time talking about the last 5 minutes of that qualifying session, and it was a fairly eventful race. We could probably spend just as long talking about the last 5 minutes of the race itself. So just throwing up the race results on screen now. Obviously, with Lewis coming in, taking his 100th victory, Max coming from all the way on the back of the grid to get second, Sainz taking the other podium place, Lando Norris in 7th. Whether he gets that is debatable at this point, because obviously with that issue with the pit stop, which I'm sure we'll get into. Bottas out of nowhere getting 5th. Another strong one for Danny Rick. Kimi Raikkonen surprisingly high as well. And I think the other notable one is George Russell dropping all the way back to 10th, yet again showing that he's Mr. Saturday, not Mr. Sunday. Matt, where do you want to start?
You've missed one when you've gone through all of this, haven't you?
Which one have I missed? Let's have a look again.
What am I pointing at right now?
I said
Fernando Alonso.
Did I not say
the old
Fernando
man.
Alonso? Yeah,
Sixth place.
Not bad.
6th place.
I think he had
Fantastic.
really good strategy. Is that where you want to start then? Do you want to start with Fernando Alonso's race?
I mean, there was a brief moment where it looked like he could be on the podium, but no. I will even say there are more important things for us to talk about today than Fernando Alonso's 6th place. Even though, hey, you said, what were you saying about, Russia only ever produces boring races? That wasn't the case this time round. We've got Lewis Hamilton P1, Max Verstappen P2, right? In the results.
And I'm going to go as far as to say is that neither of them were deserved. Tell me I'm wrong.
I don't think you are wrong. I don't think you are right. Both of those guys made the right choices at the right time, and each of them had a good chunk of pace throughout the entire race. Ended up turning out quite nicely for the championship battle. But honestly, the championship battle right now, furthest thing from my mind. Especially when we got towards the tail end of that race. The one thing that I would probably want to talk about from the start is actually that start. And,
well, I was just going to say, actually, with everything that's happened, you forget that Carlos Sainz had an absolutely barnstorming start to that race and actually took P1 from P2. Really completely lost in the whole narrative of what came later, but yeah, a really interesting start.
Definitely. I spoke to you about this on Saturday evening, and I think as soon as we got to the tail end of qualifying, where the grid had, made its way together, it was thinking, okay, that run down into turn 2, which is the longest, distance that they go from lights out to big braking zone on the calendar, was going to be something else. And it didn't end up disappointing, right? You saw the power of that big slipstream, which has, unstuck many a pole sitter in Russia for, years and years now. It's unbelievable the closing speeds that you end up seeing from guys further back on the grid. Shout out to a guy who we probably aren't going to speak about much more for the rest of this conversation, and indeed I don't think we've really spoken about over the last 2 race discussions that we've had, and that was Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll has got such a knack for a couple of things usually while driving. One of them went absent today, and that's driving in changeable conditions, that's driving in wet weather. He wasn't up to snuff this weekend in that regard, which is a shame because, I think that's one of the few areas where Lance really stands out. But that guy knows where to place his car when it comes to a slipstream. I think back to Barcelona last year where he made up, a huge handful of positions off of the start because, he managed to find that pocket underneath and gain incredible closing speeds on the guys in front. He jumped right up the order today. He was P4. You know, he looked like he might have been fighting for a podium for a chunk of that race.
Well, Lance Stroll is the perfect place for where I want to go next, actually, if we move on from the start slightly, because obviously there's so much later that we need to talk about. But this became a really intense strategy battle. And as far as I could see, there were 3 strategies going on. There were those that were trying to go for the undercut and pit early, and Lance Stroll was the first out of all of those at the top end of the grid to go for that. There was the mid, which was kind of, you know, Hamilton, Norris, and then there were you guys that seemed to not ever going to be pitting, Perez, Leclerc, and Alonso. It was incredible. I didn't know what the true grid position was until probably lap 40 when it started to settle down again, but I don't think I've seen a race like that for the entire time I've been watching, really.
And, you know, the catalyst behind those early pit stops were, you know, the thing that you do tend to see happen in Russia. And there's a few other tracks on the calendar. In fact, you know, we've just come from one where it's also the case. Tend to crop up, and that's those long DRS trains, which, you know, essentially end up being big shaken up bottles with one driver acting as the cork on the end of it. You know, and we saw that in a couple places throughout the field early on in the race, which is what kept everything so close. George Russell ended up being one of those corks, and hey, George Russell, you know, we spoke about it before the race. We've spoken about this in the past. Fair play to that guy. He started P3. By the end of the first lap, he was in P3, and he held on to that for quite a while. But, you know, you could tell very early on that Williams didn't have the pace, unsurprisingly, of the cars around. But because he had such fantastic top-end speed, and, you know, the guys behind were all opening up their DRS. They were all reaching the rev limiter essentially and unable to make any impression on each other. It allowed Lando and Carlos to start pulling away from the pack, kept everything else there. And, you know, Lance pitted very early. He was the one directly behind George. And that set off a little bit of a chain reaction that started to open up the race a little bit more. We could have ended up with a very different result today, I think, had Lance and Daniel Ricciardo not ended up going quite as early as they did. There were some mega stints from drivers out there today, though. You know, Lando did very well on those medium tires. You mentioned Perez, Leclerc, and Alonso as well, who went very deep into the race. They were all on the hard tire. Now, they had the benefit of not having to fight quite as hard, I think, as some of the other drivers. And, you know, Charles Leclerc in particular, he was very patient today, and that paid off for him in those latter stages of the race. Obviously, everything got jumbled up a little bit later on with the weather, but, you know, you look at the distance he managed to go versus Max. They both started on the same tire. Max took Charles early on. He took Bottas very early on as well, but he was scything his way through the field. And he paid for that around lap 28. He didn't end up going that much longer than Lewis Hamilton did on a medium set of tires. So, you know, it was a fascinating race from the strategy perspective alone. From the way the gaps were, from the fact that the grids, you know, the positions stayed mixed up from the start. I was on the edge of my seat from, I'd say, lap 1 all the way through to 53.
Well, I said to you there wasn't a wasted lap. We haven't seen that. There's normally a point in a Grand Prix where you can sit back and go, whew, okay, let's just chill for 5 minutes and then we'll get back on racing. It just never happened today. So once we've got through the last of the pit stops, so, you know, those 3 that were on the longer strategy, did pit, you end up with a situation where, with a bit of good overtaking, Hamilton's in second, Norris is in first. Verstappen is in 6th, gets overtaken by Alonso because he's pitted earlier, and Perez is, you know, on fresher tyres, so he can't even do the stop there because it would have just held everything up for Perez, and he would have been in danger from Alonso. So you end up with a situation where Alonso's taking over Verstappen. You think, well, this is bad. He's going to be, you know, obviously you back of the grid, you take 7th if that's probably what you're going to get, but he looked like he could have done better before that. So you think Red Bull have really messed it up there. And it kind of come that way, and you kind of the battle really is at that point is Hamilton going to catch Norris, and it looks like he's going to hold on until 5 laps to go, and that's where the rain came again to change the weekend.
So let's just roll back here. That instance where Max was caught by Alonso. I know on comms they were talking about they should have made that swap between Perez and Verstappen very early on. I think looking at the gaps that were there, it probably wasn't going to be the case that they would have been able to execute that swap, particularly with such an opportunistic driver as the old man Fernando Alonso sitting behind them there. So, it was looking rough for Red Bull. I think, like you say, you would probably think they'd be happy enough with that from the back of the grid. You never know what's going to happen. But he ended up on the hard tires when everybody around him, when Alonso was behind him on fresh medium rubber, so much quicker. But yeah, it always felt like that extra twist was coming. We had those shots all throughout the race, looking out on the gorgeous, gorgeous looking mountains, looking out onto the sea, seeing those rain clouds bubbling up. I know I would say to you, this is happening, isn't it? And, FOM, they do a very good job, I think, of races that are particularly boring sometimes, showing shots out and saying, look at that big black cloud over there. We are definitely getting some rain. Being selective with the radio messages when, somebody on team radio may have said down to a driver, like, rain coming in 5 laps. And they may have finished that sentence with, we don't think it's going to be an impact or anything like that. Or maybe at the start of it, they said 5% chance of rain coming in 5 laps, and they cut that chunk out to keep some intrigue. And then, you get to the end of the race, nothing's happened. It's bright and sunny. But it felt like it was on all race. And, it ended up just coming in. You had the drops around turn 10, you had the drops around turn 5, and each passing lap, everything was focused in on that battle between Lewis and Lando, which Lando looked like he might be able to hold on to for a good chunk of that race, didn't he? The gap came down and down, but managed to hold it around the 2-second mark. And I think it was with 5 to go, when Lando got a bit deep into a corner. He was the first one to hit that wet patch, didn't know what to expect. Everything closed right up. But as they were going around more of the track, it was like, well, it's dry here. It's too early for that change of tires. Another lap goes by, it's getting wetter. You can see some of the guys further back starting to think, okay, there might be some value here in taking the insers. We're outside of the points anyway. Bottas, Russell, those were the guys who were switching then. And suddenly it's getting wetter and wetter and wetter all over the track. And you're thinking, there's no way you can hold on to this with worn, hard tires, right?
Well, you get the team calls, don't you? And this is what I think it came down to. You got Mercedes going into Lewis when he wanted to stay out, saying, no, it's going to get heavier with 3 laps to go. You have to come in now. I think at that point they were probably just looking at preserving second, making sure he stayed on the track. Second is better than DNF. And you really get the perils of youth, don't you? Because I've seen the interview with Lando Norris. I know me and you were saying we didn't know what the team call was. He said the team call was to come in, but you're 3 laps away from winning your first race. Oh, that's so agonising, and it is one of the most heartbreaking finishes I think I've ever seen to a race. Probably second actually, and that was Häkkinen crashing out on the second to last corner, I think, or the last lap or something like that, where his engine failed. But anyway, it was absolutely gutting. He just could not keep that car on the track, and eventually it had to come in. We had a whole thing where he slides out of the pit lane and then has to go back in, and he ends up in P8 from 2 laps from finishing first.
Yeah, well done to Lando for fighting back after that and taking Kimi Räikkönen when he did get onto that into rubber. Driving very angry, I would suggest, in what looked like possibly the quickest car that was out there today, that McLaren. It was looking very strong. I said to you last week, didn't I, that I really think that these McLarens are going to end up having quite an impact on rest of this championship battle as we get into the latter stages here, because they're very much in play, and it makes all of those decisions that we were talking about off the top of the show about when you're taking the engine penalty a lot more difficult, because, you know, yes, Max managed to get P2 today, but it wasn't looking like that was something that could have happened before the rain came down. You know, the expectation, I think, is growing that Lewis is going to have to take another engine as well. It's a very long season to do over 3, and, you know, Valtteri's already on his 5th, although that was described as tactical, wasn't it? So, you know, there is no guarantee that you're going to be able to get up to those podium places, because, you know, not only do you have your teammate, you've got 2 quicker cars from the other team who will be starting further up the grid there, but you've also got these McLarens who are looking in great shape, and that Ferrari isn't a slouch either, for sure. You really feel for Lando. I am not somebody who gets emotional about, well, I'm not somebody who gets outwardly emotional, I would say, about sports. I think very much when you have a moment like that it's like the time will come, or something similar, right? I feel joy and elation from sports, but depression and heartbreak isn't one that I feel too much. But man, that was just painful to watch as he starts skidding off in the 2nd sector. I'm not entirely sure where he was around the lap. There was a lot.
It's just throwing up an image on a screen of him in the rain. I think that might have been after he changed tires, but he was just really struggling, wasn't he, to stay on.
But it looked so briefly like it might be the right call. And, you know, Formula One, motor racing, all of this, it's about being on the right tires at the right time. There is no doubt about that. You saw that on Saturday. You saw that today. The guys who made those changes early were on the right tires at the right time. But it looked so briefly like actually he may have made the right choice, because it started to dry up in places, but it was just when he rounded the corner. And I think it was around turn 5 where, you know, previously you'd seen the little bit of rain that they were just about getting away with, maybe having a moment, maybe getting on the AstroTurf, and it was torrential, and you knew at that point that it was over for him, because, you know, that was, again, the lap after Lewis had stopped. So it's really rough. Reminded me a lot of Brazil 2008. You almost expected to see Timo Glock out there on slick tires in the Toyota as well, and David Croft to steal James Allen's line, and it was that Glock.
Well, to me, you can call it luck, you can call it timing, but there's no coincidence that the 2 best drivers for the 2 best teams end up in P1 and P2, making the right decision at the right time. And you can have all the talent in the world, but decision making at high level sports is absolutely key. You know, Hamilton listens to his team. He's been there in that situation before, having to listen to his team, and he did.
Yeah.
You mentioned Brazil 2008. There was another one where he had to listen to his team. He had a world championship on the line, and, you know, he listened to his team. It was the right call. So you've got to trust those around you. I think Verstappen did the same. Obviously, he had less to lose, but he ends up gaining massively from it by listening. I think he'll learn a lot from this. I really do. I think
and
he won't make that same mistake again.
Look, you're certainly right. It's been the case that you know, a Mercedes and a Red Bull ended up doing very well out of this, but it's interesting looking at the guys who made that change there. And, you know, like you said, maybe Lewis makes that choice because he's got the championship battle. Max is sitting in, what, P6, P7 when that's happening. And he's going, okay, I'm going to throw away a handful of points when I've got a chance to get 18 for second place here. We may as well take this gamble. I wonder whether there was an element of gamble to it, because it's so easy to make that call when you're on, you know, 20 laps to go or something like that. But, you know, just a handful of laps, you're leading a race, you're on track for your first victory. track position is a hard thing to give up, especially when you've got somebody behind you who knows the tires and things. And I wonder whether the positions were the other way around, whether you would have seen Lewis staying out on track or otherwise. Lewis has had a lot of times in his career where he's listened to his team and it's worked out wonders for him. But, there were some comparisons made after the race as well to, when he was on track for potentially a championship in his rookie year, he listened to the team in China and stayed out far too long before, dropping it into the gravel. That was a weird race across the board. That was a very weird end to that season, that Spygate season. There's some fantastic conspiracy theories you can get out there about it. But, you know for sure, don't you? Lando Norris's day will come. That day was not today. I wouldn't be surprised if his day comes before the end of the 2021 season.
Well, he's been close on the last two, hasn't he? To be fair, I think, to be honest with you, other than team orders, it would have been last week, his day. So, I think you're right. It's not too far away. Just a word on Hamilton then, because obviously the big 1-0-0 today. He's him celebrating with his team. 100 Grand Prix wins. The first guy to ever do that. And I know we've got extended calendars now, more races than ever before, but 100 wins, undisputed on top. If he wins this year or next year more championships than anyone else, is he the all-time great?
He's in that conversation. That conversation will never finish, and rightly so. Lewis Hamilton's achievements are incalculable. It's mind-boggling, isn't it? 100 wins. He's so far ahead of Michael Schumacher in that regard, but I always think this, and you mentioned the extended calendars and things like that, and you've got some guys who end up cropping up as the most prolific point scorers or something like that because they have benefited from a 20 race calendar and points going from 25 to 1 all the way down to 10th place. It's very difficult to make a comparison based on some of these records across eras. But I think what you can say is that Lewis Hamilton delivered, one of his better wins today. One of his more memorable wins. Maybe, it wasn't a drive that is comparable to the others that he's had across his career. But I think it was still a drive of a champion, wasn't it? And
it was a drive of experience and pro decision making and not panicking, which
Turkey last year as well, where he managed to turn a set of intermediate tires into slicks. It was a race where he needed to eke out that medium tire as long as possible so he could sit there and have good grip on the hards towards the end. And that's the single most terrifying thing I think in this sport, is knowing that you've got Lewis Hamilton managing his tires behind you, because he could be 10 places back and you're just like, he's either going to run a ridiculously long stint at fresh tires at the end, or he's gonna pit at the right time, be on the right tire at the right time, and that is, I think, the one place where he's undisputed. Really, maybe Michael Schumacher was a faster driver, maybe Fernando Alonso was, a more prolific overtaker than Lewis Hamilton or anything like that. But he's obviously an unbelievable driver, and it is a fantastic achievement, and so great to see that this is happening in the middle of such an entertaining championship battle. I think that's the one place that he loses out, sometimes in these conversations, is he's had so many that were relatively uncontested. It's the same for Michael Schumacher. Well,
just moving on to the championship battle itself, then we'll take a look at the standings since you brought it up. And he is actually back on top by 2 points. Verstappen behind on 244.5. Obviously, we got the 0.5 from Spa. Valtteri in 3rd place. Oh, Lando Norris should have been in 3rd place today. That's broken my heart all over again. He should have been in P3. Sergio Perez in 5th. Sainz and Charles Leclerc. Sainz actually outperforming Charles Leclerc at the moment, which I don't think too many people would have predicted pre-season.
Is he though?
In terms of points on the table,
yeah,
that's really what matters. He's only 8 points ahead, but with not too many races left to go now, that's 8 points.
I mean, that could have been flipped had the rain not come.
Yeah,
You know,
it's true.
quite clearly. And that's not to talk down Carlos's performance today. I love that radio message that came from his engineer saying, you know, like, we think P5 is on. He just pitted from P2. And he's just like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? And, you know, I was so pleased to see him pull a podium out after that. But Carlos has had some rough races. That guy's got too much of a habit of tossing it into the walls at the wrong time.
Well, still ahead of his teammate, and I think that's what they'll look at the end of the season if he is. Let's just take a quick look at constructors. Mercedes well out ahead. I can't. Red Bull are close enough that it could change, but I can't see it. Not with unless Perez sorts out his Saturdays. Mercedes, I think, quite comfortably in third. Ferrari in fourth, and gets less interesting the more you go down. Alpine, I think, comfortably fifth. AlphaTauri comfortably sixth. And yeah, not really much of a battle going down everywhere else. So I think I can't see that changing at all unless Haas somehow pick up some points in the season.
You know,
which I can't see happening.
Alpine picked up a win, right? In a race that they were never expected to win, and you know that has really helped them cement P5. You can foresee Pierre Gasly having his day at some point, and you know AlphaTauri had a very rough weekend this weekend across the board. You normally ask me some questions. I'm going to ask you one very quickly because I know we're going a little bit long here. Pierre Gasly, has he had a good season?
I don't know.
And I'll expand on it a little bit, right? You know, because Pierre has pulled out some incredible qualifying performances, for sure. He has put his name in that conversation as one of the top tier, or you know, maybe not the top tier drivers, because I think that's undisputable between Max and Lewis right now, and I'm always going to say that Fernando's in that conversation as well. But you know, he's around with the Leclercs and the Ricardos and the Norris and everything like that. Even though he hasn't necessarily got the car, he's worked his way into that conversation. But man, like, something's going wrong at that team, and whether it's strategy, which they had some real struggles with earlier on in the season, Imola putting him onto the wets to start the race was one of the standout poor choices, but they are not delivering race results. With Pierre Gasly's car, and certainly Yuki's still learning.
Yeah, it's hard to judge, isn't it? Because he's quite clearly outperforming his teammate quite substantially, which is really where you can only judge someone from. So is the car not any good?
I'm not sure. I think this is the thing. That preseason testing, it looked like there was a lot of performance in that AlphaTauri. I don't think Yuki Tsunoda is a particularly accurate benchmark of what the performance of an AlphaTauri is right now. So I think it's why we can ask this question, and maybe we come back to this after Abu Dhabi and we take a look back at Pierre's season and figure out, did he outperform that AlphaTauri this season?
I think the jury's still out.
It's certainly more of a discussion, isn't it, than I think maybe some of the media would have you believe.
I think, to be honest with you, because of everything that's happening with McLaren lately, with the championship battle, I think we've completely forgotten that Pierre Gasly really exists for the last probably 5 races.
Never forget.
Never forget. I think jury's still out on whether he's had a good season. He could have, 6 really good races in a row, and you forget all about the early part of the season. So I think it's too early to tell, really. I think you mentioned it before. We've run quite long, so I think we'll wrap up there. Just one last question: who was your driver of the day?
Oh no! You said you want to wrap up, and I still haven't decided.
Just give me a name.
I think you can work through about 5 to 10 of them, probably across the results that I obviously Lewis did a great job getting that win. Max had a fantastic result that keeps that deficit down to 2 points. I think Lando Norris was the best driver today, barring that strategy choice, which is probably why I cannot say that he is the driver of the day. I'm going to say Carlos Sainz for looking his engineer in the eye metaphorically and say, "Fuck you, I'm taking a podium."
Love it. Yeah, I would have given it to Norris as well, but I think that strategy cool. You just can't really. Probably ends up being Lewis Hamilton then for making the right strategy call, and just being patient overall. Anyway,
Lando may not be driver of the day, but he's driver of our hearts. Please make sure to subscribe to him on twitch.tv because that's his main profession, clearly.
yeah, noted Twitch streamer Lando Norris occasionally races in F1. Anyway, that's all from us this week. Stay safe.